Would a cup of coffee terrify you? What about a dozen roses? For two victims of stalking, these items were a clear threat to their safety, but to everyone around them, they were simply seen as kind gestures. That is why context is crucial when it comes to stalking. This is Unsilenced, a JBWS podcast where we have real conversations about abuse. I'm MC Robinson, and today we're airing an episode I recorded a couple of months ago with
Julia Holtemeyer.
Julia is with the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center, also known as SPARC.
We say that we help the helpers. So we work with all the professionals who are helping victims of stalking.
In this episode, we discuss how victims of stalking often feel obligated to disclose personal information about themselves to law enforcement in order to explain why certain things are threatening, like a cup of coffee or a dozen roses. We also discuss the increased lethality associated with stalking when domestic violence is also involved. But before you listen, please take a moment to subscribe to Unsilenced wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us break the silence around domestic violence. It's wonderful that you're here because I do think stalking in particular is something that people don't really know that much about. The term stalking in and of itself is kind of used colloquially to refer to looking at someone's social media or like watching somebody at the gym or whatever. And people will use it in these ways that maybe diminish the actual definition of it. So if you wouldn't mind, what is the actual definition of stalking? And do those kind of behaviors count? Or what does it look like?
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is something we talk about a lot and how it's really the only, I mean, maybe you can think of one and I would love to
Hmm.
hear it, but it's the only crime, literal, actual criminal behavior crime
Hmm.
that I can think of where we use the term so colloquially, just
Hmm.
casually. It is a real victimization. It is criminal. It can be very traumatic and very dangerous. And yet people, I mean, I hear in my life, even all the time, hear people
Yep.
saying, "Oh, I was stalking your Instagram," or
Hmm.
I was stalking this, as you said, person I saw at the gym. And I think it really does affect real victims
Hmm.
and both reflect as well as affect our societal understanding of stalking. So it is a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person fear or emotional distress. So
Hmm.
I'll point out kind of some big pieces of that to help folks understand. The pattern of behavior just means it's more than one time, more
Hmm.
than one thing. So anything more than once, two or more, is a pattern of behavior.
Right.
Directed at a specific person means that the stalker has a primary victim
Hmm.
target who they are directing these behaviors towards. But we all the time see stalkers broaden that focus to other people in the victim's life. So they
Hmm.
might target the victim's family, friends, colleagues, the gym that they go to, other people who they're connected to on social media. But the stalker is doing these things to those other people peripherally in their primary victim's life.
Hmm.
And then the last part that I really want to highlight about the definition is fear. So, this pattern of behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person fear
Hmm.
or emotional distress. And so, different criminal definitions might vary a little bit,
Right.
but basically, victims of stalking are experiencing a whole bunch of behaviors targeting them,
Hmm.
leading to them actually feeling fear or emotional distress, or a reasonable person in their situation would.
So when you say a reasonable person, that's also, I think, something people might have a question about. What do you mean by a reasonable person?
We use reasonable person in the definition so that we're not requiring a victim to stand up and raise their right hand and swear on a Bible that they are feeling fear. We're
Yeah.
saying from the outside looking in, seems like a reasonable person would
Right.
be feeling fear or suffering from substantial emotional distress.
Hmm.
Also, because different things are scary to different people. So we always
Hmm.
talk about how important context is to understand stalking. Personally, I am pretty scared of spiders.
Hmm.
I just like many people, find them super creepy. Um, some people literally have spiders for pets. Halloween was not too long ago. I was talking with my friend's 3-year-old who was very excitedly telling me about this like Halloween zoo type event
Hmm.
she went to. And she was so excited telling me about how she got to hold a tarantula. And
Hmm.
I was like, I was trying really hard to be proud of this 3-year-old and be like, that's so cool. Tell
Hmm.
me more. While inside I'm screaming. But like, she loves spiders. Plenty
Yeah.
of people have tarantulas as pets.
Hmm.
To them, talking about a spider would not cause fear. It would probably cause warm and fuzzy feelings. You
Right?
talk to me about spiders, and I am immediately on the alert and
Hitting the
kind of
road.
weirded and creeped out. Like, why are you talking to me about spiders?
Hmm.
Um, so different people fear different things, which is one
Right.
of the reasons that we talk about a reasonable person.
Mm.
Also, a lot, as with many victimizations, stalking can cause a lot of trauma. And
Hmm.
so people have different trauma reactions. So
Right.
someone might be minimizing a situation of stalking in
Hmm.
order to continue with their life, to get other
Mm.
stuff done.
Hmm.
And so they might say, no, 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 I'm not scared. You know, yeah, my stalker has a gun, but they'd never actually do anything
Right.
with it. And I'm going, well, I'm a little bit scared of that,
Right.
even though you're not.
Right.
And also sometimes victims, people experience different traumas and victimizations and violence in their life.
Yeah.
And so on the kind of the other end of the spectrum, sometimes a victim might literally not be in fear because this is not the worst thing that has happened to them in their life.
Right.
Whereas again, from
Hmm.
the outside, we would say no, a reasonable person would feel fear. So we're using that reasonable person for all those reasons, kind of as a stand-in, but broadly to better understand the situation and take a
Right.
step back and look at the whole context
Hmm.
of the situation.
Yeah.
Because also that fear and emotional distress in stalking situations, oftentimes victims learn more as time goes on. And so we always say retroactive fear and anticipatory fear are included in that stalking. So if I
Interesting.
today find out that last year or 2 months ago or last week, my stalker did something and I didn't know about it last year or last month or last
Right.
week, but now I know about it, well, now I'm scared because of something that I like learned about that happened in the past, but that doesn't negate the
Right.
fact that a reasonable person would have been scared of it last
Right.
month, last week.
Yeah.
Um,
If they had known. So that's
right.
retroactive fear.
Yeah. So it's finding out about stuff and also learning more. So it could be like a scary thing that happened, or it could
Right.
be providing more context that makes you realize it's scary. So if
Right.
I thought that I've been running into this person once a
Mm.
month around town and just been chatting, and then later found out that that was targeted and they were watching me, following me, getting information about me in
I
planning,
see. Hmm.
then that would be retroactive. I'm retroactively fearful of all those times that I didn't know that
Right.
they were stalking me.
And you mentioned context, and I think, I saw one of your guys' webinars and I thought it was incredible, but you talk a lot about how context matters in these stalking cases because somebody might feel deep fear in response to, I think the example was a coffee cup being left in their car, while some people are like, what's wrong with a coffee cup? Like, that's really nice. So, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I thought that was a very interesting piece of this education.
Yeah, we use that example in a lot of webinars, and I love it. I think it very
Yeah.
clearly explains the context. So
Hmm.
what we talk about is if a victim, a person gets ready for work, goes out to
Yeah.
their car, which is on the street in their garage, whatever, and finds a warm cup of coffee in their
Hmm.
car with their name written on it and prepared the exact way that they like it.
Hmm.
I mean, I think most people would actually be kind of creeped out like that by that.
Yeah, true.
Put it
I
there.
was just thinking that.
Um, but we often talk about like, well, that would be lovely if there was some anonymous person or robot who made me coffee every
Right.
morning.
Yeah.
That would be lovely. But in this example, it turns out to be terrifying for the victim because if you get the context of the situation, you
Mhm.
learn not only had they locked their car, so someone had
Mhm.
to break in or have a key to their car,
Right.
but also that they had moved away, relocated, and kept their address a secret from their stalker, who
Mm.
now found out where they lived, went through the t trouble of going to Starbucks, getting the coffee made they liked, writing,
Mm.
their pet nickname for their victim on it, and putting it in the car and it's still warm. That's telling the victim that their
Ooh.
stalker not only knows where they live, but was recently there because the coffee is still warm,
Ooh.
went through the trouble and effort of getting the coffee, delivering it to them. It's this whole elaborate, creative scenario, totally meant to seem benign,
Yeah.
even nice, friendly, romantic to outsiders.
Hmm.
Whereas to the victim in that situation, it's terrifying. And now
Yeah.
the victim has to decide if they're going to tell friends, family, call the police. And they're freaking out. And
Right.
everyone's going, what's the big deal? Why are you
Right.
what are you're making a big deal of enough out of nothing. Are you sure you didn't leave
Mm.
your car unlocked? Oh, this is just some weird freak accident. Or you have a secret admirer. That's so romantic and lovely.
Yeah.
All of these kind of outside opinions that the victim is probably receiving that they don't want.
Right.
And in order to make other people understand, the victim then has to be really vulnerable and
Yes.
explain this whole situation. We have other, like, we often use similar examples of someone getting a flower delivery at
Hmm.
work,
Hmm.
and most people would be thrilled with a flower delivery. Probably colleagues would be like, oh my gosh, that's so nice. Who are they from? It's so lovely. Can
Hmm.
I have one of your flowers? Whatever.
Yeah.
And but to the victim, if their stalker has told them, I'm going to put a dozen white roses on your grave after I kill you, and then they get a flower delivery of a dozen white roses, well, that flower delivery is actually a death threat.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
to make anyone understand that it's a death threat, they have to provide all of this personal information. They have to Are they going to call 911 and explain all of this backstory? Are they going to
Right.
tell their colleagues? Are they going to go to HR? I mean, it's a big burden and high cost on
Mm.
victims to share and explain that context.
Yeah.
Sometimes the costs are even a little bit more or can be a little bit different or a little bit more like professional social costs.
Hmm.
All of these, by the way, all these are real life examples
Yeah. Yeah.
that have happened.
Hmm.
But another real example that we commonly use is instead of the coffee cup in a car, a victim who got into her car on her way to work, and there was a Corona beer bottle cap
Oh.
on her seat. So there's the normal, like, how did someone break into your car? Are you sure? Or are you sure you broke in? Maybe they didn't.
Yeah.
Maybe you forgot to lock it. I mean, it's a beer bottle cap. How do you know someone put it there? Like all of the, are you
Yeah.
sure you're not just being crazy type
Yeah.
of questions? But then
Wow.
on top of that, so this victim had been sober for 2 years, and their stalker, they knew that they used to drink Corona and knew that alcohol was a trigger for them. So not only as a message, put the bottle cap in the car, not only at a message of, I'm watching you, I'm following you, I know where you live, I can get to you at any time, just like I can get into your car at any time, but also as a very distinct, like, trigger, I'm trying to throw you off course.
Yeah.
And so, in addition to all of the costs of explaining the
Yeah.
context and vulnerability that I've mentioned, in this example, the victim also has to tell their friends, family, police that they're in AA,
Oh,
that they're
yeah.
sober, that they're an
Mm.
alcoholic. And if you think about, especially if you live in a small town,
Yeah.
if you might be reporting to victim services or to police people who you go to church with, who your kids go to school with. Maybe
Hmm.
you are the police officer's child's teacher. Like,
Yeah.
there are all these professional and social costs that come with victims being vulnerable and explaining the context of the situation.
Yeah. All of those examples gave me chills too. Because, I mean, here's the thing, you're right. It requires such a level of vulnerability, and to place that on a victim in those moments, for to have to explain stuff that's super traumatic or even just really personal to them. I don't even that seems so overwhelming too, because if you call the police, to your point, and you're like, there's a beer bottle cap in my car, they'd probably be like, okay, like, it just doesn't seem like such a threat. But what keeps coming back to my mind as we're having this conversation is, why do people stalk other people? And I think this could be answered in two ways. Obviously, JBWS is a domestic violence agency, so, we think about it in terms of, why do people stalk intimate partners, but also, why do people stalk in general? What is the reason for that?
Well, I do have some thoughts that I will share, but I mean, big picture, who knows? So there's some people who talk about stalking and behavior profiles and try to say, well, this stalker is doing it because they've been rejected romantically, and this
Right.
stalker is doing it to get revenge, and this stalker is doing it for power and control. And we at SPARC don't focus on those type of behavior profiles. Research on it certainly does exist. But what we say and tend to focus on is the effects on the victim.
Right.
So the stalker is doing what they're doing, and they're the only ones who can decide to change. They're the
Mm-hmm.
only ones who can change or stop their behavior. Victims
Mm-hmm.
can certainly feel empowered to make changes in their life to protect themselves, but the victim is not responsible for changing the offender's behavior. And
Right.
honestly, they can't. The offender's not going to change unless they decide to. But I think a lot of stalkers in domestic violence and otherwise do it kind of, it's like a type of power and control. They're trying
Right.
to keep themselves relevant in their
Mm-hmm.
victim's life.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to keep the victim engaged. We frequently talk about how stalkers don't really care what type of reaction or engagement they're getting, as long as it's something.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So if I have a stalker who calls me 50 times in one day, and on the 51st time I get really fed up and I answer it and say, I hate you, stop calling me. I've told you before, I'll tell you again. I'm going to call the police next time. I hope you jump off a cliff. I mean, whatever horrible things I could say to this person.
Right.
And then I hang up. Most of the time, the stalker's reaction is, cool, I got to call Julia 51 times tomorrow. It's not
Wow.
like, I mean, the stalkers are go to such creative lengths and
Mm-hmm.
put in so much effort getting that coffee prepared the way their victim
Yeah.
likes it and figuring
Yeah.
out, researching to figure out where a victim lives. I mean, they often go through really intense lengths
Yeah.
to scare, freak out, um, creep out their victims. And victims end up responding in a variety of ways. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of them struggle. Do they cut it off completely, draw a red line in the sand, and just block all messages, phone calls, never talk to them again?
Mm-hmm.
Some do that. Some try to reason with their stalkers.
Mm-hmm.
Some hope that kind of being nice will make it stop. Some minimize their experience, saying, oh, it's not that bad. Others confront the stalker and say, if you're doing this to me, I'm going to do it right back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there are all sorts of ways that victims do respond. And I think it's just really important for any professionals working with victims to think about how, for the victim to kind of be able to think through whatever they do, how might the stalker react? So try to anticipate, if I block the stalker from social media and phone calls, how are they going to respond? I was actually just talking to someone earlier today who said that a victim did that, and then the stalker escalated the situation and responded by contacting all their friends and family and actually researching, finding out where their parents lived and starting to harass their parents, getting all of their, figuring out who the victim was friends with on social media, and then
Mm-hmm.
starting to do the same things to the friends because now they couldn't contact the victim anymore.
Right.
So we often see that stalkers do escalate their behavior when the victim tries to step away, when they block
Mm-hmm.
or like set that red line in the sand or boundaries or something. And it's really, really hard on victims because, I mean, your original question was, why do stalkers do this? And I was like, I don't know, but also it's they're the ones who are choosing to do this. No one
Yep.
can make them stop.
Right.
But victims can and do choose, am I going to become a hermit and hide in my house and make my life smaller and become more isolated so that the stalker can't get to me? Or am I going to continue to keep living my life in certain ways
Mhm.
and just have the stalker continue? Because the victim can't make them stop. There's no way to stop somebody else's behavior.
It is interesting to think about this too, because in the terms of domestic violence, when you cut off that relationship, when you try and leave, it's also the most dangerous time. So things tend to escalate. But it's also interesting in general with stalking, because I think people on the outside that maybe aren't familiar are like, why would somebody do this? If your goal is to be close to somebody, why are you scaring them? Why are you aggravating them? Why are you going to these lengths? And I think, to your point, maybe we won't ever know that, but I do think, having this outside perspective of like, why is this happening just speaks to why we need more education about it in general.
Mhm.
And when we really think about stalking in regards to domestic violence, I think I found this on SPARC's website, but let me just see the actual statistics. It was the risk for intimate partner homicide is 3 times greater for victims of domestic violence than stalking victims that have not had domestic violence. And it said that 76% of all domestic violence homicide victims had also been stalked in the year before their murder, which is a huge percentage. So, why is it more dangerous in the context of an intimate partner?
Before I answer that, I want to make sure to also say, kind of in talking about why stalkers do this, whether they're
Yeah,
intimate partnerships or not,
sure.
is that there's a common misunderstanding that stalkers have mental health issues and that mental health
Mm.
is the reason that they are doing this.
Hmm.
Basically, it's not their fault, it's the mental health issue. And there certainly are stalkers who have very serious mental health issues,
Hmm.
but there's not a ton of great research on stalking offenders. But some
Right.
research that has been done found that only 2% of stalkers had serious mental health issues.
Mm.
So the vast, vast majority, whether
Hmm.
they're doing it because of power and control,
Hmm.
boundary, lack of boundaries. I mean, basically, stalkers are not respecting another human being.
Right.
The other person is saying, no, I don't want this,
Right.
either literally, verbally, or in their actions. And the stalker's continuing.
Hmm.
And the vast majority of the time, that's not because the stalker has mental health issues.
Right. I also feel like people think like stalkers are these crazy people that are like hiding in bushes and doing this stuff. And like your intimate partner could be stalking you, or somebody that you did date once, or somebody that you were very close to. And I think I think is hard for people to really sit and reflect on, because you want to think that it's this some monster that's out there that might not happen to you. But a lot of stalking victims are stalked by people that they know.
Yeah, 100%. Similar to the myth of rapists being strangers hiding in the
Right.
bushes with a knife or a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that happens, but most often it's someone who the victim knows.
Right.
And you're totally right, and exactly the same with stalkers. It's not usually strangers hiding in the bushes with
Right.
binoculars or following you down the street. That image that you probably have in your head right now
Of
of
a
the
stalker.
stereotypical
Mm-hmm.
stalker. But the vast, vast majority of stalkers and victims know each other. They're
Mm-hmm.
acquaintances, friends, colleagues, classmates, and current and former intimate partners. But we
Right.
most often hear about strangers. That's what makes it into the news. We hear
Right.
about fans stalking celebrities they've never met. And that does happen, but most of us are not celebrities. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, it's not a stranger who's stalking a victim they don't know.
Right.
About 40% of victims are stalked by current or former intimate partners,
Mm-hmm.
and similar numbers stalked by friends and acquaintances.
Yeah.
And then there are some other, brief encounters, family
Mm-hmm.
members, people of authority. There are a few other relationship categories. But
Why?
particularly for intimate partnerships, intimate partner stalking can happen before, during, or after a relationship. And
Right.
often we're only identifying the after as
Mm-hmm.
stalking. You know, she broke up with him, and from that day forwards, he started stalking her,
Right.
is a common story we hear.
Right.
And again, that does happen. I don't want to minimize that experience does happen for some stalking victims.
Mm-hmm.
But what's more common is that stalking behaviors are part of the coercive control that abusers exert over their victims.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to the colloquial use of the word stalking,
Yeah.
checking out someone's social media profile, watching them at the gym, and stalkers being creative in the ways that they creep out and scare and frighten their victims.
Mm-hmm.
Stalking behaviors are whatever the stalker does.
Yeah.
In that
Right.
pattern of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are thinking about intimate partner violence, the power and control wheel, you're thinking about isolation,
Mm-hmm.
physical abuse, sexual violence, controlling the money, controlling access to the car, isolating the victim,
Right.
monitoring their social media use,
Mm-hmm.
all of those put together in an intimate partnership would be a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person
Right.
cause a reasonable person fear or emotional distress. If we compare intimate partner stalkers to stalkers who are friends or
Mm-hmm.
acquaintances or colleagues with their victims, we know that the intimate partner stalkers tend to be the most threatening and dangerous.
Yeah.
And if you think about the relationship between stalkers and victims, how they know each other, what they know about each other, what
Mm.
access they have, it
Mm.
becomes pretty clear that intimate partners, they know your dreams, they know your fears, they also know your mother's maiden name to try to reset your passwords. I
Right.
mean, they know if you love spiders and have a pet tarantula or if
Right.
you're terrified of them. I
Right.
mean, I have two cats who I love with my whole heart. And
Mm-hmm.
if someone wanted to frighten, like, send me a picture of a dead cat and I'm going to be bawling all over the
Mm-hmm.
place. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a clear
Yeah.
threat. But only someone who knows me, and of course, everyone listening to this now know that. If we are looking at risk factors for intimate partner homicide, common ones that the domestic violence field talks about are direct access to a gun, strangulation, abusing a victim while pregnant, because we know that those behaviors are correlated with homicide.
Right.
If the abuser does those, they're also more likely to kill the victim.
Mm-hmm.
And stalking is in that list. So it's not
Mm.
as high as those others I just mentioned, but it
Right.
does mean that in an intimate partner violence situation, if the offender is engaging in stalking behaviors as part of the intimate partner violence,
Mm-hmm.
that's associated with threefold increase in the risk of homicide.
Wow.
And so that's one of the reasons that we talk about stalking is a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
It it's a sign that this might be an urgent, a dangerous, a volatile situation. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's important to look for, identify, name, recognize that stalking is happening in addition to whatever other types of victimizations, abuse
Right.
is happening, because it is that red flag. But it's
Mm-hmm.
often just absorbed, particularly in intimate partner violence,
Yes.
but also in other types of violence. There's stalking is often happening before, during, or after sexual violence, and we don't
Mm.
name it as such. But if it's absorbed under the umbrella of a different victimization, like domestic violence, then we don't see stalking as an indicator
Mm-hmm.
of there's the potential for increased harm and lethality. So we work with a researcher who talks about how stalking is homicide in slow motion,
Wow.
which I think is a very, very powerful way to think about it. And as
Mm-hmm.
you said, 76% of intimate partner femicides, when a male partner killed their female partner,
Mm-hmm.
when researchers look back on those cases, they identified stalking behaviors. And stalking
Wow.
is, I mean, it's there as an indicator. It's a red
Mm-hmm.
flag. And so if we can get better about identifying it,
Yeah.
then we can get better at responding to it,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully prevent some homicides.
Thank you, Julia, for all the wonderful work that you do at SPARC. The SPARC website is absolutely filled with information and educational resources that anyone can access. I took one of their webinars and was seriously blown away by the content. If you want to check out SPARC, visit stalkingawareness.org or find their social media sites at Follow Us Legally. All of this information, by the way, will be linked in the show notes. Please come back next week for more conversations about abuse because education is key to preventing domestic violence. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unsilenced, Real Conversations About Abuse. This podcast is produced by JBWS, a domestic violence agency serving Morris County, New Jersey. Please let us know what topics you would like covered on this podcast by sending an email to podcast@jbws.org. Please note that this email address is only intended for content relating to the podcast. It is not meant to offer immediate assistance or access to services. If you live or work in Morris County and think you might be in an unhealthy relationship, JBWS is here to help. Please visit our website at jbws.org to learn more about our services, or call our 24-hour helpline to speak to members of our staff at 1-877-782-2873. If you recognize controlling or abusive behaviors in yourself, JBWS can also help change those behaviors. Through our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, JBWS offers programs for men, women, and adolescent males who have used abusive or controlling behaviors in their relationships. Please visit jbws.org/JCNV or call 973-539-7801 to learn more. If you don't live in Morris County, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Domestic violence grows in silence, so thank you so much for listening and helping us break through that silence through these types of conversations. Please follow us on social media and continue to share our content to get as many people talking about domestic abuse as possible.